Ah.
Anand,
Hi,
hello.
Sampath.
No, Tejas here. I am not able to switch the controls here.
You're not able to switch the controls.
Yeah, because that thing is still disabled.
Okay. Okay. Can you make me a co-organizer or something like that?
One sec, I'll try.
Tejas, if you're unable to do that, okay,
Yeah, yeah.
I am going
What
to
I'll
try
do is
and now.
see, I have an option to leave the webinar. Okay.
Ah,
So I'll just leave the
just
webinar
hold
and
on.
not end the webinar.
Okay, don't, no, no, I'm going to sign in using your credentials that you gave me.
Okay,
Okay.
okay, fine. Do that. Yeah.
Hello. Okay, but who else is here? Hello. Hello. Yeah, Tejas. Hey, can people hear me? Yeah, Tejas. Oh, okay. Okay, no, I wasn't sure. Okay, no, got it. Okay, got it. So let me try and it is not allowing me to share my screen. Just trying to. Okay, that's webcam. For some reason, I'm not able to share my screen. Can you see my screen, everybody? All right, fantastic. Good afternoon. Welcome to the webinar. I assume, I guess we have a few more people who are yet to join. We'll just give people about 5 minutes. So there's a couple more people who are registered. We'll just give them 5 minutes to join and then we can get going. All right.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the live webinar on demand planning for consumer products. We'll be beginning shortly. Mr. Anand Srinivasan from D Square would be presenting and taking over from here.
Tejas, thanks for the intro. Quickly, just let me know if you, how long do you want to wait? I think we've already been here for about 10 minutes. Let me know whether we should just get the ball rolling, or do you want to give a
Sure,
couple of
Anand.
minutes?
I think we can start.
All right. So thanks for joining, gentlemen. What I will be talking today about is uh, how do you do a planning system for consumer products distribution? As we know, it's a very complicated problem, and how do we leverage analytics and insights into data to do a better job of planning a distribution process? Uh, Right. So I'm going to quickly run to what we call the demand planning challenge, right? So if you will, what it is what is the key challenge of FMCG product distribution is really getting the right product at the right distribution outlet. Especially when you're talking about an industry like FMCG, the distribution network tends to be extremely vast. The breadth and the depth of the distribution network is quite mind-boggling. When you consider something like a country like India, you would look at something of the order of, excuse me, tens of thousands of outlets in a single state, right? And obviously, when you look at it at a national level, you can understand how big the challenge is. The second challenge is that you will find what is known as a multi-layered distribution network. We've seen it go up to even 7 or 8 layers of depth, where you go back and talk about a manufacturer pushing products to territory managers, who in turn work with multiple distributors, who work with sub-distributors, and then eventually, by the time the product reaches the outlet, the depth of the depth of the network is quite extensive. Now, given the two of these, there is a fundamental problem that we look at when you look at organizations that try to plan for distribution product in terms of how do we get the right product to the right distribution outlet. Planning by definition happens at the highest levels, where the plans tend to be aggregate. When I say aggregate, you will look at what you call RUM metrics and targets, which is revenue, units, and margins. You will look at it and say, hey, I would like to set down a target of so many units, so much in revenue, and so much in margins. And you would set down and make your plans at a very, very aggregate level. However, the execution of the plan, which is really getting the right product to the particular outlet, is actually done at an extremely granular level. What we mean by that is the execution is done by SKU, by outlet. So when a sales agent walks into a particular outlet, that outlet does not know, does not care, nor does the sales agent know or care about the aggregate RUM targets. What they care about is how many units of this particular SKU am I going to sell into this outlet today. right? And the outlet would typically be focused on, I'm going to pick up so many units of this particular SKU because that is the one that I see moving in the market. So at a fundamental level, the challenge comes because you make a plan at an aggregate level and then you execute at a granular level. And the biggest challenge with this is creating a plan at a granular level is a monumental task simply because of the size and scale of the problem involved. And what we are going to show you today and talk about today is a solution that will allow you to leverage models and analytics to translate aggregate plans to granular levels. So just to illustrate the plan execution dichotomy, as we call it, at a corporate level, plans are developed at an aggregate level. So you would be looking at a product family, you will be looking at a territory level, and at best a monthly level plan. Now, once the plan is established, targets will be established for your sales team, talking about revenue, units, and margins, right? Once the aggregate plan has been developed at a corporate level, you will find that execution happens at a granular level. So where you will go and say, on a particular day, at a particular outlet, how many SKUs are we going to sell? Now, if you talk to anybody in the distribution business, they will come and tell you that there are several operational constraints in the execution layer that are not factored in at the plan, right? And this, by definition, results in what would be a suboptimal plan, because you make a plan which does not factor in the real operational constraints, and hence your execution or the outcome of your execution is always going to be below the plan. Typically, organizations, when they look at it, we are looking at execution to about 50% of their plan. So if they plan for 25 crores in revenues, they will actually look at execution of the order of 50 to 60% of that, simply because of the leakage that happens because of the constraints not being factored in, right? Now, it's actually goes beyond just an execution constraint, because what happens is when you make a plan, your budget allocations, your marketing allocation, your Marcom spend, your sales and advertising budgets are all targeted to the plan that you make. So you will make a plan saying, I am going to be making, having so many units in revenue, so many units, so much in revenue, so much in margins, and to deliver to that plan, we have made a budget in terms of what we are spending. So as it turns out, as your execution comes below the plan, you start seeing a diminishing return on your marketing spend and advertising spend. So how do you kind of bring your plan and execution closer together so that your plan, which will dovetail into your marketing and other spends, will actually reflect constraints that are on the ground, so that you can actually optimally allocate your plan and marketing budget down to the gentlemen, if you can hold on, it seems to be a technical glitch. I believe the slides are not moving. Can you hold on for a second? My apologies. Looks like there was a technical glitch where the slides were not showing up. So anyway, to reiterate, the whole idea of what we're talking about is what is called as a plan execution dichotomy. So you have plans that are made at a national level or a zonal level, at a aggregate level, what is known as a top-down approach, where you would set down targets for volumes, product mix, margins, discounts, etc. These go as inputs into the sales planning process, where you'll come back and say the sales team would be empowered to go back and say, this is what you need to go and sell in which territory and things like that. There is a second approach, which is known as a bottom-up approach, where you would go back and look at the most granular level and look at it and say, you know what, in this particular area or this particular outlet, really what can we project as, forecast as potential sales. Now, the challenge with a bottom-up approach, while it will tend to be much more indicative of reality, because you are actually looking at the actual operational issues of the distribution cycle. The challenge that happens is that the sheer number and volume and the complexity of the distribution network is such that it is impossible for a individual or a team to be able to look at every conceivable outlet and build a bottom-up plan, an exhaustive bottom-up plan. So what we'll be talking about today is how do we kind of bridge that gap. Okay? So what is the solve, right? So the solve is what we'll be talking about today is a system that talks about how do we translate aggregate plans to the execution level of granularity. So the assumption is that plans will be made at an aggregate level, but then how do we algorithmically translate those plans into an execution level of detail? Essentially, which means that we we'll decompose the aggregate targets to the SKU outlet day level. We will use some kind of statistical extrapolation algorithms simply because it is not feasible to be done manually. As these aggregate plans are decomposed to the granular level of execution, you will start noticing certain operational constraints that will kick in and at the granular level. So you might come back and say, my aggregate plan calls for an outcome of X, but the person who's responsible for the granular execution might come back and say, in reality, X is not a feasible answer because we simply cannot do it, given the territorial intelligence and the local, hyper-local intelligence that the person would be bringing to the table. So what we would do is, as we decompose this, we'll be able to identify and highlight these operational constraints. And then you can make corrections to the plan at various levels basis these operational constraints. So if I make a plan and we are able to quickly, instantaneously translate it into operational level of detail, then it becomes very easy for an operations person or a sales executive to come back and give us feedback in terms of which portions of the plan are not going to be feasible. And then we will roll up these constraints, these corrections, and the constraints and corrections to the aggregate plan, so that essentially we are going to make sure that our aggregate plan and our execution plan are in sync. Right? So just a quick overview of the process. What we're talking about, we start with developing an aggregate plan. You specify targets for growth drivers. Typically you will look at, how much industry growth are you going to look at, how much product mix penetration are you going to look at, how many outlets are you going to expand, things like that. We'll have a system that will allow you to do a live estimation of impacts on your critical metrics as you make these changes. So if you come back and say, look, I would like my product mix to change this way, exactly how is it going to impact my top level RUM metrics? And you need to have a live estimation, right? Then we take that and then we algorithmically disaggregate it to come back and translate that into a granular level of detail, which then is seen by the individual people who are responsible for their area of execution or their granular layer of execution, where they can come back and highlight conflicts. Then they feed in those conflicts into the system, and then we use that to reaggregate and revise. Okay? That is pretty much what we have from a show and tell perspective. What I'm going to do is quickly move on to a demonstration, if you will, of, if I can just change my sharing. Are you? All right. So let's talk about before we get into this. Let's talk about how typically the setup. What we have shown here is some generic data created for how a person would approach a distribution planning system. So on the left, I can see how my territories are aligned. I can see Karnataka. Within Karnataka, we have Bangalore. We have multiple distributors, multiple territories, and then eventually it comes down to individual outlets. So as you can see, this gets complicated extremely fast because for every single territory and every city, you have multiple distributors, and the number of outlets simply just grows exponentially. Now, I'm going to start off by let's start by looking at Karnataka, just as an example, while we'll just wait for the data to pull up. Now, what this tells me here, let's quickly go through a read of what we have here. Right up top over here, you have a tracker which gives you the critical metrics that are important. In this case, we have identified volumes, revenue, and a revenue per unit. Now, volume is self-explanatory, just a physical number of units of items that you sold, and revenue obviously is your gross revenues in terms of how much MRP or whatever selling price you sell the item at. The third metric that we have looked at, which is called as a RPU, is something that is extremely critical for a FMCG kind of a setup, because you have multiple products that have multiple price points that you are distributing. Now, in a scenario where you drive your organization entirely based on units, that is volumes, it is quite likely that you will find the distribution network will react and push the least priced product through the chain, and hence, while you might end up being comfortably meeting your volume targets, you will fall significantly below your revenue targets. So the revenue per unit is actually a good indicator of the richness of the product mix that we are talking about. Okay, so those are the three kind of things we're looking at. And what we are looking at is simultaneously, I want to look at my plan, which is the base, which is the first line. And then the second one I would come back and say is the first row that you have there, where you say volume and target, are basically the volume, revenue, and RPU base volumes, which is, if you take, I'm going to use the previous month as a basis for building that. And what is the target? Obviously, in this case, you will find that the base and the target are equal, simply because we have not started developing a plan yet. So we have taken July of last year to develop a plan for July of this year, or August of last year to develop a plan for August of this year. Now, the second row that you will see here is what is called as a selection row, because on the left, we have selected that we are currently viewing Karnataka, and it tells you exactly the same metrics for that particular territory. Now, the reason why we want to show both of these is now, as this view is, I am going to be the territory manager for Karnataka, and I am going to be making certain plans. But while I make my plans for Karnataka, I want to look at how it impacts South India and how it impacts my national metrics. Right? So that's the reason why we saw both the current territory region and then the overall impact. Right? And then when we look at it, we will look at the drivers for growth. You have something called an industry growth percentage, which says, compared to year on year, I expect the industry to go at a 3%, 5% average for my territory. Right? Now, the interesting thing is we've got a couple of drivers here. So where we've got a and a typical thing I would look at in an FMCG is what would be known as your cross-sell, this one. So I'm looking at it and saying, look, I have a variety of products that I'm distributing, and I have them categorized as food and beverage, health and wellness, household, personal care. Now, by reading the table that you see here called category sales, it gives you a few very quick things. It tells you that in Karnataka, in this data that we're looking at here, there are 472 total outlets that are part of my network, which have sold at least one item of my product in the last planning period. Right? Now, what you will see is the base penetration outlets, which says that out of the 472 outlets in Karnataka, food and beverage items are being sold in 420 of them. Health and wellness items are being sold in 367 of them, household items in 285, and personal care in 433. As you can see, the distribution of the products and the product families that I'm selling vary even within the state, and it's not as though if I sell one outlet, they're selling all of my products. Similarly, I've also given another cut where you go back and say, look, not only am I distributing various products, I'm also distributing various brands. So I want to look at, we just got a few brands here, Cabin Care, Colgate, Unilever, Dabur, etc. And it kind of tells you very quickly that, for instance, it tells you very clearly that Colgate is not showing a good penetration in this case, whereas R&B is showing extremely strong penetration, relatively speaking. Okay? So now the whole idea is how do I go about and make a plan? So now as I want to increase my metrics, by the levers at my disposal are either I go back and say, how do I cross-sell products across my network? So if I want to go back and say, I have 472 outlets that are available to me to sell, and only 420 of them are selling my food and beverage products. So what I would like to do is set a target of, let us say, 450. Now, instantly you will notice something. The moment I set a target of 450, what we are saying is that today, as per the planning period, there's about 52 outlets out, and I want during this period for my sales agent to be able to sell food and beverages in 30 additional outlets that are today not selling my food and beverage products. Now, as you notice, then the screen actually recalculates instantly to tell you that a few things on the right. You will see the base volume, the base revenue, the target volume, and the target revenue. What it tells you is that out of 420 units, you had 61,200 as a total volume of sales, and 640,213 as the total revenue that you are generating in the base. But when I increase that from 420 to 450, you will see that the volume has increased and that the target revenue has increased correspondingly, because now it says it's done an extrapolation to come back and say, if you were able to make so much volumes and revenue with selling it to 420 outlets, what does it mean when you sell it to 450? Now, the additional thing you will notice is on top, you will see the metrics have also changed to reflect this increase in volumes, correct? So now what you will see is that not only has my Karnataka volume increased from 218,000 to 222,000, your overall national level has increased from 7,21,000 to 7,26,000, approximately 7,25,000. So you will see that by making a change and increasing my food and beverage product penetration into my Karnataka network, I can see how much it is impacting not just the volumes, but the revenues as well as the revenue per unit. Now, what you will notice is that in this case, because we increase the food and beverage items, the revenue per unit has actually come down. Now, what does it mean? That means that my food and beverage products are the lower priced of my product family, and hence when I increase the proportion of my food and beverage products, obviously my product mix is getting weaker. So just to reset, I'm going to put this back to 420 so that we are back here. Now, if I look at my health and wellness, right, let's say 367, and I want to make this 400. Right? Now you will start seeing stuff going the other way. If you notice, the same way your target volume has increased, you will see the change in the target volume and revenue for the Karnataka region as well as for the national level. But in this case, here you will notice that the revenue per unit has actually increased from 147.9 to 148.1. So what that means is your health and wellness products are your more expensive products, and hence by pushing them, you will push your revenue per unit target higher. So as a planner, I can now come back and play around with this, because it is instantly. I can play around with various combinations of these, correct? And I can come back and say, and I can play around with various combinations of these to actually figure out how do I increase my volume without diluting my margins and my revenues. Okay? So this is how I would kind of play around with various product categories, and then I will have to go back and say, how do I ensure that this allows me to make a plan that will allow me to reach my targets, and you can evaluate it instantly. Now the interesting, so let me just reset this so that before I do that, let's also take a look at, say, something like Kerala, right? Just to tell you how. So now you will see that the similar structure exists for Kerala. So if you look at all of India, you will find, but Kerala is being a smaller territory, has a lesser number of outlets. Okay? So now how do I go about making this plan process, right? So let's open up Karnataka again, and let's take a very simple example where I'm going to just go back and say, look, I would like to increase my food and beverage penetration to 450, right? And that's all I make. That's the only change I've made. And I see a certain increase in volumes, revenue, and I see there is a small dip in my revenue per unit, and I say, look, that's fine. This is exactly what I want to do. Now, the critical thing is there, we will go back and say, look, I want to save and commit this plan. So when I commit it, now what is happening is it is actually going back and using the algorithmic disaggregation, which will translate this plan that we have made into the SKU outlet day level plan. So comes back and says, I've committed the plan. Now, when I look at Karnataka, you will see the same numbers that we had put in there. But now let's take a look and see what has happened to Bangalore, right? So Karnataka has made this plan. Now you will see, actually start seeing that the Bangalore plan and the targets have actually been automatically set basis what we have said for Karnataka. So basically we said in Karnataka we had 420 outlets, of which we wanted to increase that to 450. And the system has determined that, well, to achieve that 30, Bangalore, which had 208 outlets penetrated for that category, has to be increased to 238. So now the person who manages Bangalore has a clear idea of what he or she needs to do so that your goals at Bangalore level are aligned to the Karnataka level. And that obviously goes down all the way here. I can look at an individual distributor and you say, hey, no, that needs to go from 68 to 75. I can look at a particular region and that says that it needs to go from 28 to 30. So if I am the salesperson managing Kanakpura, and I have 28 outlets where I'm selling this to earlier, which means that to me, I have to go back and for the current planning period, increase the penetration of food and beverage from 28 to 30 outlets, which means I have to cross sell into 2 other outlets. Now, what this has done is algorithmic, we have using extrapolation, we have disaggregated all the way here. Now, here's the interesting thing, right? Now, let's say we have the salesperson, or let's take a look at, say, something like Yelahanka. And so we've got this. And let's say for some reason, the person at Yelahanka is ready to come back and say, wait a minute, you have told me to max out my from 40 to 45. Or if I can look at, say, something slightly bigger, a distributor, it says that, you know what, I had 68 outlets. You asked me to sell it into 75, but guess what? I can actually sell into 76. Now, when I do this, what you will find is that you will find the number changing, and actually you will see the impact of one particular agency on the overall metric over and above this. So now when I save this, what you will find is that this then starts, this is where we talk about putting in operational constraints, where you can come back and say, listen, you're asking me to do 75, which is, my market is already saturated, I can only do 70, or I can actually increase it. You can actually go back and put this and save this so that that constraint gets fed in and the plan gets reaggregated. So when I do that, then I can go back and look at my nationwide just to see what the impact is. So now what you will find is that we had assumed that we want to increase the number in Karnataka region by 30 outlets. So which means that across the country, at least in the data is for South India, but across the country we have 1,576 outlets here, of which we were selling food and beverage for 1,391 of them. Now that has gone to increase to 1,421. Now, while I do this, you will find also that as you increase the food and beverage penetration, you will find an interesting thing that you will start seeing some changes even in the by product, because by brand, because let me go back to Karnataka, because that was a change that we made so that it will be clearer. Now, this was the only change that we made. We took it from 420 to 450. But if you look at the category called food and beverage, it has multiple brands in it. So now what in the extrapolate, in the disaggregation, what we have also done is looked at the various brands, like Cabin Care, Colgate, Dabur. Now, Colgate in this case has no F&B category. Obviously, that's the reason why you will see that Colgate has not increased the penetration, because we only increased products in the food and beverage category. But if you look at Dabur, Cabin Care, even R&B and Unilever, all of them have some products in the food and beverage category. So obviously, when you say I want to increase my food and beverage penetration, it is also making sure that in the extrapolation, the various brands are increasing their penetration basis the historical performance of each of those brands. So now you can actually go back and say, well, you know what, while I do that, I know that's what it is, but I see Colgate being extremely weak, so I am going to increase this to 300 outlets. So now I can go back and say, what does that mean? How does that reflect on my overall metrics? I can come back again, save the whole thing, and then see how the changing a certain cut or a change of driver impacts my overall metrics. So the beauty of this approach is that it allows you to make plans at various cuts, and we can obviously configure the system based on the kind of cuts that you want to look at. So you will find that I want to look at penetrating it by brand, by product category. I can go back and say, this is what I want to sell into. It translates, disaggregates the plan down to an outlet where the sales agent who goes on the beat or a route can actually go back and say, this is exactly what I will be selling today, because I have a very clear plan that says that out of the 28 outlets, you're currently selling food and beverage products into 28 outlets. I need you to increase that to 30 outlets. And that ensures that everybody is pulling the same way and the targets are met. Right. Now, obviously, while this is there, what we want to look at is, we want to look at just pull up a few dashboards so that we can look at how things are performing. So I'm going to look at, this is the historical performance. So you will find exactly the same thing that we spoke about when we look at, let me filter this for Karnataka. You will see exactly the same data that we saw there. So you will find Karnataka, where we had said 420 units, that's what it's telling you. And here it clearly tells you that the penetration for food, health and wellness is significantly lower. I can look at the revenue per unit by region. You can see that Tamil Nadu is doing quite well, whereas Kerala is doing quite poorly, which will also reflect in the same data that when you go here, and if you look at Kerala, you will start seeing that the revenue per unit is significantly lower than what it is. So you will see that it just runs at around 124. Now, if I want to go back and say, if I am the head of the Kerala business and I want to figure out how to increase my revenue per unit because I have a target to increase that, then I could go into my dashboards. I can go look at and say, what are the various products? Let's look at let's look at various metrics that I want to look at. I can look at, let me see if I can pull up. Actually, I can create my own thing, and I want to look at the revenue per unit, and I want to look at it by the various product categories. So what you will find very clearly is the revenue per unit is much higher in my health and wellness category. So which means that if I want to focus on improving my revenue per unit in Kerala, the products that I need to push to improve my revenue per unit, I have to heavily push my health and wellness product category. So again, I could go back into my demand planning, and given that I want to increase my revenue per unit, my category, and you will see very clearly that the penetration is extremely low for health and wellness, which explains why Kerala is running very low. which means I will go back and say, listen, I want you to make a concerted effort to improve the sales of health and wellness products throughout Kerala. Now, when I do that, right? So you will start seeing that, hey, no, this is how I'm going to improve my richness of my product mix. Then what happens is, in order to achieve this, you go back and say, what do I need to spend in terms of a marketing budget if I want to position my health and wellness products in Kerala? Do I need to do, offline, online, print versus TV versus mainstream media? What kind of advertising do I need to do? How do I kind of stimulate the demand to do that? Right? That is pretty much what we have as this one. I think we have a little bit of time. I would like to leave that open for any kind of questions and answers if people have any. Tejas, I don't know, since this one, could you enable Q&A or something like that, if it makes sense? Because I do want to give a few minutes so that people can ask any questions if they have any. So we do have a question here, which says about, I spoke about using this for marketing budgeting. How about supply chain and procurement planning? Yes. So while the intent is obviously to try and focus on marketing, right? What do we get out of the system is actually a what I would call a execution-friendly feasible plan. Now, as with anything else, right? Like they say, right? There is always many a slip between the cup and the lip. So people make plans, and then basis a plan, several actions are triggered. One of those actions that I alluded to significantly over my presentation was about spend on marketing, because that still remains the most significant driver of execution to the plan. Now, when you talk about supply chain and procurement planning, it depends upon the kind of end user of this. If you are talking about a OEM or a original equipment manufacturer, or somebody who's actually manufacturing the goods that are being distributed. So if you look at something like a Colgate Palmolive, or a P&G, or some, they actually brand and sell their own products, in which case obviously this plan has ramifications into their supply chain and procurement in terms of how they need to align to that. Because if you make a plan which says that you're going to increase your distribution and throughput through your distribution channel by about 15%, then your supply chains has to be geared up to deliver to that. Now, if you take somebody who you use primarily as a distributor and who is not necessarily a manufacturer, then all they're going to be looking at is primarily looking at what do I need to do in terms of marketing and feet on the ground spend. So yes, the concept that it gives you is equally applicable in both marketing planning as well as supply chain, but each one attains more significance depending on the perspective of the business use of this kind of a solution. Okay. Anything else? All right. I think we are at the end of we have run out of time here, so we just give it a couple of minutes to run it till the scheduled end of day's play, and we will wrap it up. Thanks for everybody who attended. Absolutely a pleasure hosting this, and look forward to hearing from you pretty soon. And you have the email from Tejas. Please feel free to reach out to him should you have any follow-up questions or something that you would like to get clarified, or would you like additional information. We are happy to provide that. All right. Good evening and have a good day.
Thank you, Anand. Thank you everyone for joining in. We are wrapping up the session for the day. Please feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you. We are ending the webinar now.